Hi, this is our Federal Reserve presentation and analysis. We're going to go through a bunch of things about the state of the economy right now. And at this time, the economy is continuing to perform well, and it's in a strong state, and most of the goals that the Federal Reserve has set are continuing to work towards being met.
So for GDP, economic activity is continuing to expand, and the GDP has increased at an annual rate of 2.8% in the third quarter. Supply conditions have been improving. The investment in equipment and intangibles has become stronger, along with the growth of consumer spending has stayed pretty solid over the years.
The Fed has a goal of unemployment, and the unemployment rate has increased from last year, but it's still pretty low. In its recent meeting, the Fed said, in the labor market, conditions remain solid. Payroll job gains have slowed from earlier in the year, averaging 173,000 per month over the past 3 months. The unemployment rate is higher than it was a year ago, but at 4.2% in November, it has remained low. So while the unemployment rate is increasing, it's still at a low level and not too alarming.
Okay, so for inflation, the Federal Reserve Committee has claimed that although inflation has eased over the past years, it is still at too high of a peak, and they still need to work on lowering it. This is a direct quote from the Federal Reserve. They said that inflation has eased over the past year but remains elevated. And they also said that inflation is expected to stabilize at the Fed's 2% target in quarter 4, 2025, later than the original quarter 2. This may cause a setback in the Fed funds rate expectation of 3.00 to 3.25 until October, which, like I said, is later than expected.
As for sectors, activity in the housing sector has been weak as of lately, and the increase in GDP would benefit the secondary and tertiary sectors right now, which are the activities of turning raw materials into goods and services that would benefit businesses and consumers. So they would be benefiting right now because of an increased GDP.
So for monetary policy actions are taken by a central bank, which is to help control the interest rates and the money supply in an economy. So the Federal Reserve Committee is closely monitoring the monetary policy for risks of inflation or unemployment. With this supervision, the policy interest rate has been lowered by 1/4%, which holds borrowing costs at 4.25% to 4.5%. And this meets the set expectations. Some tools that the central bank uses to help control the monetary policy are open market operations, reserve requirements, and interest on reserve balances.
One recommendation that we would have that would help support our central banking system and the economy as a whole is the inclusion of public opinion. With this inclusion, banking decisions would incorporate more recommendations from the public, creating better trust and communication with its audience. And some of the public's biggest concerns and recommendations right now include keeping a clear and low inflation target, which keeps prices more stable and affordable for the general public. And that also increases the trust in the banking system and the economy as a whole. Strong communication with the public regarding the Fed's policy decisions and economic forecasts. So the public wants to know more about what's happening in the economy and within the Federal Reserve system, and this will keep the public up to date with what's happening in the economy that they live under, and more knowledgeable about where their money is. And then the last one is put a larger focus on how the Fed's monetary choices impact lower income households and other demographics. So more effort into how the choices of the Fed affect the economy, specifically people with a lower income and people who will be more affected than higher classes by the changes of the economy.
So for geographic context, geographic context measures the distribution and performance of economic activities over different geographical areas. One example of geographical economic patterns in the U.S. is how in recent decades, southern states have experienced a rapid increase or boom in population and income, whereas in the Midwest or the Northeast, they have struggled immensely with higher incomes and just getting more people to move there.
Demographic and socioeconomic context measures and displays the distribution and performance of economic activities across different demographic groups. This measure demonstrates how the state of the economy affects different parts of the population based on things like gender, race, income, age, and more. Some demographic factors that are taken into account when measuring this are gender balance, ratio of males and females, average household size, age distribution, which is the percent of people in each age group in the economy, race and ethnicity throughout the population, and some socioeconomic factors that are taken into account when measuring this are occupation within a population, income level, so average income per household, how much your family makes, level of education distribution, so the level of education that you or a certain group has, and the poverty rate, so the proportion living below the poverty line. So there's a lot of geographical or demographic and socioeconomic context that can be taken because so many groups are taken into account. But one example is that high inflation in the U.S. has a negative effect on families living under the poverty line. So right now we're experiencing an increase in inflation. So families living under the poverty line are likely to have negative experiences, and it's likely to negatively impact these families, especially of different races and ethnicities other white, because of the statistical groups of people below the poverty line.
So risks. Inflation measures the price increase of goods and services over time. The Federal Reserve's main goal is to monitor and keep the inflation rate low and stable. There are many risks to inflation. Members of the FOMC lowered the target federal funds rate by...
Couldn't help but to overhear a little bit of what you guys are talking about. You're having way too much fun. Way too much fun. Good luck in all that you're doing, huh?
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Members of the FOMC lowered the target federal funds rate by 0.5% in order to slow down the increase in inflation. However, many argued that they should take a slower approach and only lower it by 0.25%. If inflation continues to rise, it would put more pressure on the prices and affordability of houses, as stated by Michelle Bowman of the FDS, specifically those of lower affordable families, like lower income households. These higher prices also force lower income households to spend more valuable money on necessities such as food, healthcare, water, house prices, bills, stuff like that. This is a direct quote from Bowman. This is a positive action made by the committee. She said, "The 12-month pressure of core personal consumption expenditures inflation, which provide a broader perspective than the more volatile, higher frequency readings, has moved down since April, although it came in at a 2.7% in August, again, remaining well above our 2% goal."
So in terms of economic forecast, the GDP is predicted by the Conference Board to increase each year at a steady pace. The U.S. economy is predicted to have a slower economic activity and growth in 2025, increasing at a pace of 2.7% for 2024 and 2.0% from 1.7% in 2025. Inflation is expected to continue to stabilize in the following year as it is right now and as it has been this past year. Monetary policy is expected to adjust with the evolving economy in order to help the Fed meet their goals of price stability and maximum employment.
So lastly, impact on borrowers and savers. So at this time, borrowers are experiencing an advantage as inflation is really high right now. However, it's not at a huge advantage because although inflation is high, it is still eased the past couple years, and including this past year. And we expect it to continue to stabilize in the following years. Borrowers will slowly begin to not experience as large benefits as they had been, and their debt will not decrease immensely. And because of inflation does not benefit savers, they are not experiencing an advantage at this time. However, like I said, Inflation is continuing to ease and get closer to the 2% mark. As it continues to stabilize, savers will start to experience more advantages closer to borrowers and stop experiencing less disadvantages, as their value of savings will not reduce at as fast of a pace. We hope you liked our presentation.
Thank you.
Hope you had a great break.
You think that'll